everybody. I am so sorry I wasn't able to make it in person today, but I'm glad I can still talk to you in spite of all of that. I would say technology is wonderful, but this will be my third attempt at recording this. So hopefully it's a good one. All right. Without further ado, let's get started. Today I'll be talking about the four opens and the OpenInfra way. Hopefully you've heard about these concepts before, but if not, I really hope that you can take something away from this back to your open source communities that you contribute to, and they can become healthier and stronger as a result. So let me introduce myself first. I am Kendall Nelson. I am a senior upstream developer advocate at the Open Infrastructure Foundation. I am also an open source contributor and have been to OpenStack specifically since 2015 and Kubernetes since 2019. I have had the pleasure of delivering talks all around the world at a lot of different events, both virtually and in person. And I'm so excited to be able to be here today with you all. And when I'm not getting to travel the world, I really enjoy watching Doctor Who, reading or watching Harry Potter, and also running. So today I'm going to talk about this concept of the four freedoms and how they evolved into the four opens that the OpenInfra Foundation uses as guiding principles for our projects, and how that, with our concept of the three forces, makes the one OpenInfra way. So I'm kind of giving away the whole talk here from the start, but hopefully you stick around with me anyway. So first I'm going to start with a little bit of history. When we think of open source, we don't normally think about where it comes from exactly. We think about what we want to get out of it. We think about the marketing aspect, the free software itself, maybe, or maybe even the community of people to ask your questions. But where did this come from in the first place? How did open source start? So originally, it was about pieces of software that people were writing on the internet and sharing with one another. So these four freedoms were kind of the original definition of open source. So you have the freedom to run the program as you wish for any purpose. Then you have the freedom to study how the program works, to dig into the code and see what you can do with it. And to that end, to be able to change it so it does your computing as you wish. That's kind of what we think about primarily when we think about open source, I think, or at least I do. Then you have the freedom to redistribute copies so you can help your neighbor, and also the freedom to distribute copies of your modified version, which is kind of the other side of what I think about when I think about open source. And this is all fine and good as a starting point, but there are definitely some holes in this definition when you think about open source as it is today. You don't see anything about how the software is going to be built or the licensing. There's nothing about how the collaboration will actually work and how that's going to affect the software. So, without further ado, the first of the four opens, open source. So when open source was first defined in 1998, it focused on a really specific angle. And that was one that mattered the most to businesses, which makes sense because they were starting to take an interest in this free software movement. And that focused on the availability and reusability of the code. So really focused on those four opens. So as it's evolved over time, by 2010, actually, most open source projects were closed in one way or another because of all the different kinds of licenses, which is why we at the OpenInfra Foundation really like the Apache 2.0 license, because it's OSI approved, it's GPLv3 compatible, DFSG compatible. It's a lot of licensing and legal jargon, but it's really important to set up your project on like a good foundation, and that comes from the license. So open source means that it's not open core. Open core is actually very different from open source. So a couple examples of that are that, say a company produced a piece of software and they made it publicly available so everyone could go look at it. But when you go to run it yourself, there is a chunk of it missing that actually turns out to be really crucial. Or maybe that same company made all of the code available. They weren't hiding anything. But when you wanted to contribute back to it or make changes to it, they wouldn't let you. And that's all defined by the different kinds of licenses. A third example of not true open source is having like an enterprise edition. So that company that made that piece of code and shared it out with everyone ended up keeping some of the features back so that they could make a profit on them rather than sharing everything communally and then building separately on top of it like a lot of our communities work. So that's the first open. The second one is open design. So requirements are going to need to be set in the open. That's where any project starts, right? After once you have the license set up anyway. Specifications or design documents in the Kubernetes community, they use KEPs. These are reviewed and iterated on openly. Priorities are defined communally, and the community controls the design process from start to finish. There's no single person or entity that is making all of the design decisions and setting those requirements. And this is really, really hard, even though it seems like a simple idea, but design is an inherently opinionated process. So it's important to reach a better product, or if you do it correctly, you will reach a better product that better fulfills the needs of the users. But everybody represents different users, and so you need to be able to communicate about those openly. And that's where the open design process comes in and is really crucial to reach that better software. And as a natural progression, you finish your licensing and you get your repository set up, and then you do your designing of what things are going to look like, and then you want to start developing. So open development, clearly you have the source code repositories are publicly available. Open source makes sense. But code reviews are done in the open, and anyone should be able to leave a code review or ask a question on a particular piece of the code as it's being developed. And as a natural extension of development, testing should also be done publicly, and anyone should be able to view the logs and dig into the issues when they put up a new patch set or pull request. And the community really shouldn't differentiate contributions depending on the affiliation of a particular individual. It doesn't matter where they're geographically located, or if they're in school, in university or college, or if they're being paid full-time by some company to work on the project. It doesn't matter who authored or committed it. Anyone should be able to do development and develop in the open. Open development makes it easier for new contributors to grow into long-time contributors and really builds trust amongst the community. And the last open, my favorite, perhaps, is open community. So there are a lot of different parts of open community, lots of things to keep in mind, and lots of tips and tricks here. So for a community to be open, truly open, all processes should be documented. It should be open and transparent, easy for anyone to walk in and read about and understand and get involved. Governance is elected by the community as representative government, and anyone should be able to rise to one of these roles. And I would even say that we should encourage new people to continue rising into these roles as well for the health of the project long term. All project meetings should be held in public, in the open. They shouldn't be invite only. They shouldn't be closed. and they should be recorded some way or another, whether that's a text-based meeting or a video meeting. Regular day-to-day project channels should also be logged, but you should encourage asynchronous communication as much as possible, and that should also be held in public mailing lists that are archived for later reference. The best way of having a really open community is making sure everything is referenceable at a later date, and it will lead to better conversations. Things will be better documented. It's got a lot of kind of a domino effect on the health of the community and project over time. And I know sometimes after doing all of the design and development, there are still conversations that you're going to have where you need to make progress on things, and maybe you aren't reaching a consensus of the whole community. So you can definitely use this lazy consensus model to make progress and make decisions and keep iterating and moving forward. The lazy consensus model is also called lazy approval. Basically, you just, when you send out your asynchronous communication to a mailing list, you're like, oh, well, by this day, if no one objects, I'm going to move forward with it. And that is really, really helpful in a community as large as OpenStack or Kubernetes, when you're trying to get as many opinions as you can and give time for people to voice their opinions, but also recognize that a release might be coming or a decision needs to get made to make progress on something. More concepts that help support an open community is the concept of contribution as currency. You build up a karma in a community and a level of trust with those in the community based on how you contribute and the manner in which you contribute and the volume in which you contribute. Another concept that's really important is one contributor, one vote. So it kind of goes back to that governance, representative governance idea. But basically it just is for helping newcomers into the community. If each contributor has one vote, everything is fair and equal. And if each contributor has one vote, then you don't end up with benevolent dictators hanging around a project forever with all the influence in the world, because sometimes you need that new perspective, and sometimes that's more valuable than somebody that has been around for the entire lifespan of the project. All of these things together create a level playing field, and it ensures the community is cohesive and inclusive and trustworthy, which is really important to the health of any open source project. And in particular, in the last couple of years, I feel like trust is much harder when we can't get together in person. So anything we can do to help support that is crucial. Diversity also makes for a really healthy community. And we want diversity of not just race and gender and company affiliation, but geographic location. Being able to have a community around a project that's geographically distributed is great, which is why I'm so excited to be able to work remotely like this with you all in Korea. It's wonderful. So we have all these 4 opens, and that's great, but like, do they actually work? Do we have concrete evidence of that? Well, yes, we do. We definitely do. A number of success stories within the OpenInfra Foundation are OpenStack, Kata Containers, and also Zool. So OpenStack just finished its 26th on-time release, and we're looping back to the beginning of the alphabet. But really awesome is that in our latest user survey from last year to this year, we showed a growth from over 25 million cores to over 40 million cores in production. And it also just had its 12th birthday. So it's been going strong for 12 years. Kata Containers 2 just had its 5th birthday. It's a container runtime project compatible with Kubernetes. So we're all about that integration and open infrastructure, layering together and building out this awesome world of open source. One last success story is Zool. If you're unfamiliar with it, it's a CI/CD system which started out as gating specifically for OpenStack, but has now been generalized and open sourced into its own project. And a lot of companies use it internally for their own gating and testing. And Zool also just had its 12th birthday, being as old as OpenStack. But if you know of any other success stories outside of the OpenInfra Foundation that use these 4 opens, please let me know. I would love to hear about them. So we have those 4 freedoms that evolved into the 4 opens. And then we have these 3 forces, which are influencing every open source project, whether you're aware of them or not. And balancing the 3 forces with the 4 opens is how we create this idea of one OpenInfra way. So to introduce the 3 forces, they are ecosystem, developers, and users. So ecosystem is the technologies and the companies and universities and projects all in the similar space influencing a particular project. And then you have the developers that are actually working on the software themselves, and the companies that they represent also influences the project. And then the people using the software, which is a little bit smaller view, or not view, a little bit smaller perspective or more specific to a project than the larger ecosystem. So a particular user wants to use the software this way, and or maybe add this driver or make sure it's compatible with this technology. That user is then going to influence the community in that direction, hopefully, and be involved in the process. So we really need to balance these 3 forces to ensure community and project success. And the other thing about the developer aspect of the 3 forces that I wanted to point out is it's more than just upstream and downstream balancing. It's all the developers involved in the process from start to finish. It's the community that's upstream. It's the internal influences from downstream that are within the project or within the company that person is representing. It in itself is a lot of things to balance. But establishing common goals and building connections between the forces really helps avoid siloing. And when you can balance these 3 forces, you using the 4 opens, you then have this OpenInfra way of developing your project, supporting the community, and growing and being successful. So, kind of in summary here, you have the 4 freedoms that were like the original concept of open source, and they evolved into the 4 opens, which kind of dictate actually how a community should function and run and work together. But those 4 opens need to be used to balance all of the forces that are impacting a particular project and community. But when done correctly, you have one OpenInfra way that fosters the health of the community, the success of the project, the trust of the contributors, and just the wonderful world of open source. Thank you so much for coming to my talk today. I really hope you learned something. I am really hopeful that next time this event happens, I'll be able to be there in person. But until then, feel free to contact me any of the ways you see on this slide. If you have any questions, if you have any success stories, I would love to hear from you. Thank you.